Question I find myself asking is not, can I learn the skills I need to lead change, but rather, can I survive it? The senior pastor of a large church spoke those words to me in a whisper, but I heard this a lot. In fact, these words repeated over and over again inspired everything you're about to learn. Whether it was speaking to a group of United Church of Christ leaders in a Knights of Columbus Hall in St. Louis, a large group of Lutheran Church Missouri Synod educators in Phoenix, a select group of Episcopal priests in Manhattan, or Baptist pastors and lay leaders in Auckland, New Zealand. Over and over, someone, usually the person in charge of training, education, or leadership development, would whisper to me, "I don't think we have anyone who can actually do this." One seminary president said to me, "I don't think I can find anyone in the entire country to lead the kind of changes you're talking about." The changes that I was describing is called adaptive leadership. And these leaders weren't talking about the specific skills I was teaching. They were speaking about the stamina, the strength of purpose, the perseverance necessary to lead a church or organization through deep change. Why is this so difficult? Resistance. Internal resistance. Resistance is the key difference between management and leadership. Good management is usually met with a grateful response from those whom we manage. They appreciate that we took good care of the things important to them. Leadership is often met with stubborn resistance from the very people we are called to lead. They resist the changes needed in order to get them where they asked us to take them. Management is about taking care of the most important assets, opportunities, resources, plans, and especially, as one of my colleagues often reminds us, of the people entrusted to our care. Management, biblically speaking, is called stewardship. Whenever I'm hiring a youth leader, I often joke that every parent actually wants a youth manager. If the youth leader takes 10 kids to camp, they want all 10 kids to be brought home. 90% is not an A, I tell my students. But leadership requires change, and humans are wired to resist change. A good manager keeps everything on course, but leading change requires you to spring into action and change course. Leading change is disruptive, and everything within us resists disruption. Leadership, therefore, is always about transformation. It requires learning, and it results in loss. And even when we know what we are signing up for, we resist both the vulnerability of learning and the pain of loss. So to lead, especially in the face of resistance, requires that leaders develop resilience. Resilience is not about becoming smarter or tougher. It's about becoming stronger and more flexible at the same time. It was August 28, 1963, and the mall in front of the Lincoln Memorial was filled with over 250,000 people. They had come to Washington for a march for jobs and freedom. After a long afternoon of stirring speeches, gospel singer Mahalia Jackson sung two spirituals that caused Roger Mudd of CBS to remark, "All the speeches in the world couldn't have brought the response that just came from the hymns she sang." A rabbi spoke, and then Reverend Dr. Martin Luther King Jr. was introduced as the moral leader of our nation. He and his speechwriter friend, Clarence B. Jones, had been up all night. Dr. King himself had spent the night writing in longhand, and by 4 a.m. had put the finishing touches on a text that was meant to be both sobering and thoughtful, absent of inflammatory rhetoric, but sternly calling the nation to account for the ongoing denial of rights to so many of its citizens. In the Emancipation Proclamation, the United States of America had given a promissory note to its African American citizens. A promissory note, Dr. King said, that had 100 years later been returned insufficient funds. It was time, he wanted to say, for the United States to make good on those promises. Dr. King's speech began more scholarly than soaring, and when he stumbled on a line that he didn't think would work, he began to riff off script. It was just then that the preacher heard the gospel singer crying out from behind him, "Tell him about the dream, Martin! Tell him about the dream!" Clarence B. Jones, who was seated nearby, heard Mahalia Jackson's words and saw Dr. King glance at Jackson and put his notes aside. Jones said to the person sitting next to him, "These people out there, they don't know it, but they're about ready to go to church." And Dr. King launched into the words that have now become hallowed in our American history. "I have a dream," he said. Using the imagery of Isaiah, he spoke to the task of bringing change in the face of immense, even centuries-long resistance and the despair it can cause. I have a dream that one day every valley shall be exalted, every hill and mountain shall be made low, the rough places will be made plain, and the crooked places will be made straight, and the glory of the Lord shall be revealed, and all flesh shall see it together. This is our hope. This is the faith that I go back to the South with. Dr. King stands before those people, many of whom had come from the South, who had come from the marches and the lunch counters and the protests and the dogs and the hoses and the jails, and says to them that because I believe that God is going to transform this world down to the dirt, we go back to work. We go back to the South. We go back to the marches and the lunch counters and the protests and the dogs and the hoses and the jails. With this faith, he says, we will be able to hew out of the mountain of despair a stone of hope. With this faith, we'll be able to transform the jangling discords of our nation into a beautiful symphony of brotherhood. With this faith, we'll be able to work together, to pray together, to struggle together, to go to jail together, to stand up for freedom together, knowing that we will one day be free. With this faith, we'll be able to hew out of the mountain of despair a stone of hope. What do you do when you're facing a mountain of despair? What do you do when you're facing a 400-year-old mountain of despair? You don't blow it up with dynamite, you don't bash it with a sledgehammer, and you don't back down. You hew it. You transform it. What does it take to become the kinds of leaders whose faith enables them to hew stones of hope out of mountains of despair? How do you become a tool that can hew? Tools that can hew are tempered tools. They are tools that have been forged in the fire and hammered with stress in a process that creates something that is both stronger and more flexible than its raw material. We will use that process to talk about the very formation that we need to undergo as leaders who are going to have resilience in the face of resistance.